As you all, I'm sure, are well aware, the regulatory climate has become more and more challenging over the past few years. So in order to help you to handle this, NACD has strengthened our regulatory program. There are several elements to that. The first I'd like to mention is our new Regulatory Affairs Committee. The NACD Board of Directors at our August meeting decided to restructure our Government Affairs Committee structure, and we formerly had a Government Affairs Committee that handled both legislative and Hill advocacy and regulatory issues, and then we had a separate PAC board for our Political Action Committee. Well, the board voted to change that and create a special Regulatory Affairs Committee, a standing Regulatory Affairs Committee to focus on all of the regulatory issues before us. And at the same time, they made the Government Affairs Committee the Government Advocacy Committee, and that committee now focuses on our Hill advocacy and our political activities, and the functions of the Political Action Committee board were brought under that committee as well. So our new regulatory committee is completely focused on regulatory compliance and advocacy to better address member needs in that area. Also, we have dedicated regulatory staff. I, Jennifer, used to handle both regulatory and legislative issues, and it was always a balancing act. It seemed that if regulatory was very demanding, the legislative work was neglected because there was so much, and then if there was a lot going on the Hill, the regulatory work suffered. So we have since hired a new Vice President of Legislative Affairs. His name is John Shanahan. Some of you may have met him, and he is handling all of our Hill and political efforts, and then that frees me up to be Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, and I am doing full-time regulatory now to be able to do more on the regulatory compliance and advocacy front with the federal agencies. We also are developing more compliance resources, a lot of which we're going to talk about today, and really increasing our outreach to the federal agencies so they can be better informed about what we're all about with chemical distribution and responsible distribution, and we can develop better relationships with them on and get advanced information from them as to what they are thinking in their regulatory programs. So now I'm going to turn the program over to Cliff for a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about our Regulatory Affairs Committee and the regulatory survey.
All right. Thank you, Jennifer. I just wanted to, again, thank everybody on behalf of the committee for attending the webinar. I think it's going to provide you with some very interesting information and see where we're actually heading. First thing I want to do is share with you what the mission of this committee is. And basically our mission is to work with government and members to promote informed regulations for the betterment of the chemical distribution industry and society, and to equip members to be compliant by developing and delivering resources to ensure awareness and regulatory requirements and changes. And at that first meeting, we also made the determination that for us to meet our task, we needed input from the membership, and that's what brought about the survey. We needed to first find out basically what regulations that the members felt were most applicable to them, and then secondly, which ones they really needed the most resources on. So again, we needed this information to make sure we were headed down the right path and we weren't going to be trying to develop things that really weren't needed or of interest to the membership. And again, that's what brought about the survey and why it was very important for you to participate in that survey, and we really appreciate the response that we did get back. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jennifer.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. Yeah, so as Cliff said, that was the first real action item out of the Regulatory Affairs Committee's first meeting that we held in December, and really to help us focus and prioritize resources on what our members are most concerned about. And how we went about this, I don't know, hopefully you all have seen the regulatory checklist for chemical distributors. We decided to take the items on that and have members, as Cliff said, rate them as to how applicable each item was to your operations and what your rating was for your need for more resources from NACD or other sources. So we used that as a basis and tried to make it not too terribly long of a survey, but we did this we could. We bear with me while I advance. So we conducted the survey in January and really gave people a pretty short turnaround time. I think we sent the notice out on a Wednesday and asked for the responses by just a little over a week from that on the following Friday. And we received an excellent response. We had 146 people fully complete the survey. They answered every question, and dozens more at least answered some of the questions. So that was very, very helpful. Companies you didn't have to identify yourself in the survey, but 90 companies did, and then 11 additional employees from those companies did as well. So we did get a very good portion of the membership that even identified themselves, and I'm sure more even did participate. And we also had at least 25 states participate, plus Canada. So really great participation for a lengthy survey and for the fact that we didn't give you a whole lot of time to do it. So we really, really appreciate all the input. Okay, just a little snapshot of what we found. This list before you now is the top 10 items for applicability. And as you can see, number 1 is the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard, the new GHS rule, to align our OSHA Hazard Communication Standard with the Global Harmonization System. There's some hazardous materials items on there, the Hazardous Materials regulations, as well as Hazardous Materials registration. Next is the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, which all of the elements of that regulation showed up in top 10, either applicability or need for resources or both. That was one of much concern. The Toxic Substances Control Act, chemical data reporting, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations, hours of service, and items such as that, and then the Drug Enforcement Administration Chemical Control Program. So you'll see 3 items, the Hazardous Materials Registration, the FMCSA regulations, and the DEA Chemical Control Program. Those were the 3 that were rated in the top 10 for applicability, but they were not in the top 10 for the resources needed. So moving along to resources needed. Again, OSHA, the Hazard Communication Standard, number 1. That was by far the one of most concern. Closely followed by the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. This was the Emergency Response Planning section. As you can see, there are 4 sections of Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act in the Need for Resources section. So that tells us that's really one of concern for our members. The TSCA Chemical Data Reporting was number 3. CFATs again, Hazardous Materials Regulations. You'll see the 2 that are in this list that were rated top for resources needed but not for applicability were the Environmental Protection Agency Spill Prevention Control and Countermeasures Rule and the Clean Air Act General Duty Clause. So a lot of good information for us right there in that top 10. So moving along to the, we'll get into a little bit more detail on some of these results now. The number 1 issue by far was the OSHA Hazard Communication Standard with new deadlines coming up. Everybody's going to have to read through their labels and their safety data sheets. And the first deadline for this is coming up in December for training. All employees must be trained on the new label elements and safety data sheet elements by December 15th of this year, 2013. And then the big deadlines kick in 2015 when all the labels and the SDSs have to be done. They have to be done for manufacturers by June of 2015 and for distributors by December of 2015. But the definition of distributor is very, very limited. And if a company repackages, imports, blends, or anything like that, you're considered a manufacturer, and the June deadline comes about. So that's high on everyone's mind. As far as applicability, 121 respondents ranked it as a 4 or 5, and 127 said they needed more resources and would like to see that. So we have already had, we've already done a bit on this from NACD. Starting at the 2012 OPSEM conference, we had a session on the new GHS rule, which was very well attended. And then about a month ago, many of you were probably on this, we had a webinar on it. It was presented by Emily Walter of ICC, the Compliance Center. That's an affiliate of NACD. That was the highest attended webinar NACD has ever had. We had 125 participants on that and really valuable information. So that was so good that we invited Emily to come back and present at our Responsible Distribution workshop, which was held yesterday and Tuesday. And again, Emily presented on the topic and really covered things in good detail and really built upon a lot of the questions that were asked during that first webinar. So we're looking to have yet another session at our upcoming ChemEdge conference in August. It used to be known as OPSEM, but we've changed the name to ChemEdge. So we'll have more on that there. Okay, the next item, did I skip over one? Excuse me, bear with me just a second. Yes, the next item for applicability was the hazardous materials regulations. As you all know, there's so much to keep track of there, all the incident reporting, packaging, placarding, training. So this issue was, and these regulations are changing all the time, as you know, so it's a lot to keep track of. So that was rated number 2 for applicability and number 5 for resources needed. 114 respondents ranked it as a 4 or 5 for top on applicability, and 111 requested more resources. So we're also looking at providing more resources on this. Yesterday, we invited the individuals from the DOT Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, the agency that administers all the hazardous materials regulations, to come and talk to the Responsible Distribution Workshop. And we had 2 individuals from the southern region down there in Atlanta where the workshop was, and they did a great job talking about inspections and what to expect on an inspection, and also telling us about all the various resources they offer. PHMSA they do workshops throughout the country, throughout the year. They do two full-day seminars a year, and then they do several one-day seminars. So we'll definitely get the word out to the members on that. There are people from the agencies there. They go over all the requirements, but one thing they really stressed was training. That's one thing that's probably the highest violation area that they see. But they really want to work with us, and so we'll look at doing more with them too, because as you know, there's a lot to know there, and things are always changing. Okay, now we'll get into the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. As I said, there's a lot of help requested here. When all the sections of this are added up, it's just as big of an issue as the OSHA GHS, if not more. So first we had the sections 311 and 312, which is the Tier 1 and Tier 2 reporting, and that was ranked number 4 for applicability. 98 ranked it as a 4 or 5, and number 7 for resources needed, with 102 needing resources. The next item was the Toxics Release Inventory reporting. That's the report that's due every July 1st for certain chemicals. And that was ranked number 7 for applicability, 80 ranked it as a 4 or 5, and number 9 for resources needed, with 97 wanting resources. Then continuing to the next slide, we have more on the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. Sections 301 and 303, Emergency Response Planning. That was ranked number 8 for applicability and number 2 for resources needed. So that was ranked very, very high in the survey, and that was number 2 right after the OSHA GHS for that aspect of that regulation. And then finally we have the Section 304, Emergency Release Reporting, ranked 18 for applicability and 8 for resources needed. So we actually have done a bit on this regulation. Last year, you might recall that we held a whole webinar series on EPA enforcement. EPA as we've heard, has been really increasing their enforcement over the past couple of years. They seem to have chemical distribution in their sites and have issued some substantial fines on chemical distributors, and so we decided to have a whole education campaign to inform members about this. So we had a series of 5 webinars, just kind of giving an overview of what EPA was looking at and what to look out for, what to do when an inspector knocks at the door. Our third one in the series was on the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. So we went over all the different elements of that. And then we had one on the General Duty Clause, and we had one on the issue of product segregation, which is something that EPA had been addressing in their General Duty Clause violation orders. So we did that. We also had sent out a regulatory alert in April of 2012, which a lot of the information from that regulatory alert has also shown up on the regulatory checklist. And that was information that we got directly from EPA Region 1. EPA Region 1 has been one of the most active in all these enforcement cases, and they actually provided us with a list of lessons learned and things that they had found and were concerned about during inspections. So we'd sent out a regulatory alert about that and incorporated a lot of that information into the regulatory checklist. But if there are things that we can do to help you on that, please let us know, because there's obviously still a need, and we want to be able to address those needs. So if there's more information you need or specific resources that we can provide, please let us know. Okay, the next item was the Toxic Substances Control Act chemical data reporting. That was ranked number 5 for applicability and number 3 for resources needed. As many of you know, EPA changed this rule. It used to be known as the Inventory Update Rule, and EPA changed it to chemical data reporting and required a lot more information to be reported to the agency. And basically this applies to just about anyone who imports products into the U.S., products that are on the TSCA inventory, and you're required to submit reports about that. And those were due on September 30th, I believe, under the new system. But it was for chemicals from 2011. But for the next reporting period, which will be in 2016, if there were chemicals imported at certain thresholds for any of the years between then and now, 2012, 13, 14, or 15, you'll have to take that into consideration. So it'll be important to have this rule in mind long term. So we are thinking about doing another webinar on that. We had a webinar on TSCA back in 2009, but it's been a while, so we thought it might be a good time to cover this topic again. Also in 2010, we did several regulatory alerts on the chemical data reporting, since it was so new and required more information. And we also had Ferguson and Campbell, who is our environmental regulatory partner, held a good webinar on the topic, and we specifically on the new CDR reporting, and we directed people to that. So we will do more on that, because that's going to be a big one going forward, especially as more and more companies import products. Okay, the next item was the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards, the Chemical Security Regulation, Site Security Plans versus Alternative Security Plans. That was ranked number 6 for applicability and number 4 for resources needed. So we've been pretty busy on this topic. We held at the Responsible Distribution Workshop session, workshop this week, we held a session where we had both DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, and the American Chemistry Council come and speak to the group. And the DHS gave an update on where they were with their program. They have increased the pace of inspections. They had started with tiers 1 and 2, the highest tiers, but they have since moved on to tier 3. So if you have a tier 3 site, you may be hearing from them sooner rather than later. But there have been it's been very slow to get this program off the ground. Their site security plan that they've developed through the department has a lot of problems. So now they are very open to the idea of alternative security plans, where a company would use a whole different format and make it more of a narrative, and it wouldn't be nearly as repetitive as the program that DHS had developed. Because I've heard several members say that they filled out the whole thing and they end up printing it out. It's hundreds of pages long and really doesn't give you a plan. It doesn't give good information to go by for either you as a company or for DHS to inspect. So they're very, very anxious to work with us on perhaps even developing a chemical distribution alternative security plan. So we have formed a working group to do that, and we'll be having our first conference call on April 18th. And DHS will join us with that and give us some advice as to how we can make this work, but it could really expedite the process for us and for them. So we're pleased that they would like to work with us on that. Mentioning the American Chemistry Council, they have developed an alternative security plan template, and that has been endorsed by DHS. Now how that works, it's really just a different format, and every company has to enter their own information, and that will have to be individually inspected by DHS. But I think DHS said they've approved 3 ASPs so far. So it is becoming more and more of a viable option, and I imagine they'll be doing many more. Also, yeah, every year there's a chemical security summit, which is a great opportunity to hear from DHS about the latest on this regulation and other things going on at the department. That's going to be held in mid-July. Registration hasn't opened yet, but we will let the membership know as soon as that is open and available. Okay, so those were the top items from the survey. You know, one thing that really stood out to us when we saw the results were that we asked a question about how many members were considering, either already had, were considering, or were planning to dedicate additional resources to regulatory compliance to meet all of the increasing demands, whether that be additional staff, more outside consultants, shifting resources from one area to regulatory. And we got the results were that over 70% were in that mode. Either they already had, they were, or they were seriously considering to address all the demands. We also asked for additional regulations that we didn't cover on the survey or in the regulatory checklist, and we got a couple of suggestions there, so we'll be looking at those too. So as Cliff mentioned, we are really going to be using these results to develop future regulatory sessions and webinars and guidance papers, as well as on the advocacy side, federal agencies to focus on. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the regulatory initiatives that we have going on. First of all, hopefully you've seen this, we have the regulatory checklist and resources for chemical distributors. We developed that in 2012, about a year ago. And basically it's a list of federal regulations that are applicable to chemical distributors with links to additional resources. We have a brief description of what's required in the regulation, and then lots of good links for all of the for everything we have in there. I was really surprised as I developed this last year about how much good information is available on some of the government websites, particularly the EPA. If you know where to find it, they really do have some helpful tools that you can use. So we try to include all those links in there as a resource. We do update this list when we learn of new regulations or something we hadn't yet covered, or there are changes to the existing regulations. Another caveat of this is it's a 13-page list, so depending on your operations, they might not all apply, or there could very well be additional regulations out there that do apply to what you do. So it's a constantly evolving document. If you look at that and you see something that's not on there, please let us know, and we will include that change on the next version. It just covers federal regulations right now. I know a lot of people are concerned about REACH and some of the international regulations, as well as state regulations, particularly California. But to keep this somewhat under control, we're just handling federal for now. We also have plans to make a spreadsheet version of this, where we would basically list the regulatory topic, a description of it, whether it's a training requirement, a reporting requirement, so on, the deadlines, and the regulatory citation. So the thought there is that companies could take that and kind of cut and paste and really tailor it to your own needs. So you should be seeing that later this year. And this is located on the Member Resources Advocacy Resources page right here. And there's a lot on that particular page. All of our webinars are there, the checklist, our latest alerts. That is that you do need login information to get to that spot, but it's definitely worth checking out. And we did just post a new version of the regulatory checklist with a couple of updates. We added the Food Safety Modernization Act, the latest on the OSHA GHS rule, and a couple of other items. Uh-oh. Oh, I clicked on the... Okay, here we go. So additional compliance initiatives we have. You may have noticed we've really enhanced our NACD news brief. That is clearly a regulatory focus now. Plus it has relevant legislative updates. It comes out every single Tuesday, and we've been including more and more regulatory articles in there with links to more information. If you don't, then this comes out like clockwork every single Tuesday. So if you are not receiving this, which I've had a couple members tell me they haven't, please contact Caitlin O'Donnell, our communications manager, on that, and her email address is right here on the slide, because there's a lot of valuable information in that, so you don't want to miss that. Because a lot of members have had spam filters block that out or other technical difficulties, but you want to make sure you see that, because a lot of good information on there about regulatory updates, about upcoming webinars, anything and everything regulatory. We've also, as you've noticed, obviously, have increased our regulatory webinars. We've established a webinar series for NACD, and we have a webinar on the first Thursday of every month at 12 noon Eastern Time, and these webinars cover either regulatory or responsible distribution topics. So 2013 to date, we had a legislative and regulatory outlook session in January. We had our record-setting OSHA GHS rule webinar in March, and we're doing this one on our survey and initiatives today. And coming in 2013, as I said, we're planning one on TSCA and the chemical data reporting, and then we'd also like to do one on the FMCSA the Compliance Safety Accountability Program and their safety fitness determinations that they have under that. And we are always open to suggestions from you, so if you'd like to see webinars on anything, please do let us know. And again, we have all of our archived webinars under that Regulatory Resources for NACD members page. We have the whole EPA enforcement series that I mentioned. We have the old 2009 TSCA webinar. And we also did one in November on export control regulations. Okay, so we're also doing more in-person regulatory training. As I mentioned, we had the Responsible Distribution Workshop this past week, just yesterday and Tuesday. And in addition to covering the latest on the fifth cycle for responsible distribution, we had 4 regulatory sessions. We did a presentation on this, just what you're hearing right now. As I said, we had the Department of Homeland Security and the American Chemistry Council come and talk about the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards and Alternative Security Plans. We had the Department of Transportation, Pipeline and Hazardous Material Safety Administration come and talk about inspections and all the resources they have available. And finally, we had, as our last session, Emily Walter from ICC, the Compliance Center, talk about the Global Harmonization System. So I think that was really well received. People were very happy to have those regulatory elements to the Responsible Distribution Workshop, and we'll definitely look at doing more of that. We've also a few years ago, we really increased the regulatory coverage at OPSEM. It was OPSEM. Now, as I said, it's ChemEdge, and we will continue that as we go forward. We're also increasing our advocacy with federal agencies. We are working to do more and more regular meetings with key federal agency officials who write the regulations that impact us, and then really develop relationships with some of them. For example, if you can really get in there and give them your perspective before they start writing a regulation, they might design it better, and so it won't have such a bad impact on our operations. and they can give us advance notice of things. But I think it's all beneficial. For a long time, I think our industry really didn't want to go out there in front of the regulators too much, hoping not to be noticed. But those days are gone, and the regulators know well that we're there. So we are increasing that. And even we would like to start having some meetings at even at the regional level to meet with the regional groups. As I mentioned last spring, several of us met with the EPA Region 1, who's been really heavy on enforcement. And while we're not going to agree on everything, it was good to have a good dialogue and agree to work together where we could. I don't think anything bad could come of that. So you may be hearing about opportunities in your own areas and regions to go meet with the regional administrators of EPA and OSHA and DOT and those types of agencies. We also, here in Washington, like to participate in working groups with government agencies. I serve on the Chemical Sector Coordinating Council, which was a group formed after September 11th, 2001. The chemical industry is a critical infrastructure, and there were formed groups of these critical infrastructure associations to work with DHS on security initiatives. And one thing that we've worked with DHS a bit on is the chemical facility anti-terrorism standards, as well as a lot of other initiatives. But that's a good opportunity for dialogue. Also, another example is the Small Business Administration Office of Advocacy. They have these roundtable groups on environmental regulations and OSHA regulations, so we try to be involved in them as well. So we'll be looking for even more of those opportunities. Another thing we're going to do is have a regulatory track at the Washington Fly-In this year. Our Fly-In is coming up on May 8th and 9th, just a little over a month from now. And usually the Fly-In is focused on Hill meetings, just a full day on the Hill, but we are going to visit some agencies this year too. We're going to try to go see DOT, EPA, DHS, and OSHA, and take our members in there, give a good pitch on responsible distribution and all the good things that chemical distributors do, try to find out more where these agencies are coming from, and really try to collaborate more with them. So we're looking forward to that. We think that'll be very beneficial. You'll see the address for the Washington Fly-In if you haven't already registered. It's not too late, but it will be a great program. Also, you could split it up however you want. You could do all Hill meetings, you could do all regulatory meetings, you could do some of each, but we'll work with you with what you would like to do there. Okay, speaking of advocacy, we've also been increasing our advocacy initiatives with the federal agencies. One thing we'd like to do, and we've already started on this, is having more agency participation in NACD events, workshops and webinars and things like that. It was great at the Responsible Distribution Workshop. We had both DHS and DOT participate. And I think that was beneficial for all. We're going to try to get some to come to our ChemEdge conference in August again. It's kind of tough right now because of sequestration. They all have more and more they're being subject to travel restrictions. But we'll do all we can to get people there. I mean, even such as DOT this week, it could be from the regional office if there are knowledgeable people there. But there are always webinars that doesn't cost anything for them. For example, for the safety fitness evaluation webinar from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, they'd probably be willing to do that and be on a webinar with us. So that would be good for all. We would like to submit more comments to regulatory agencies on various proposals. We've done a bit of that in the past, and it really can make a difference. For example, we just had a recent regulatory victory. Last year, PHMSA had issued a proposal to require shippers to include closure instructions pretty much on empty packages, and it would have been a nightmare, especially for chemical distributors who have so many different products and so many different customers. And so we submitted comments questioning the cost-benefit of all this. There hadn't been any incidents in that area, and why were they doing this, and really all it would involve. And they heard us. They came out with a new rule last month, which addressed several changes to the hazardous materials regulations, and this closure instruction provision was one that they had been considering, and they said in the final rule that they had decided not to implement the closure instruction rule based a lot on the comments that NACD had provided, and they quoted us in there and everything. So that's an example of how some of these comments really can make a difference. We are also looking for additional opportunities for collaboration with the agencies, for example, working with DHS on the alternative security plans. So we'd like to do more and more of that for the benefit of all. Okay, to help us do this, we would like to form regulatory subcommittees under the Regulatory Affairs Committee. We have for several years had task groups in the areas of transportation, security, environmental issues, and OSHA type issues, and we're in the process of kind of formalizing this and making them sort of part of the Regulatory Affairs Committee, but really to get into detail on a lot of these issues and to find other things that may be out there and to provide input for regulatory comments. So we will need your help on this. The work on these, we'll be writing up description papers about what these will really involve, but most of the work will be done by email and conference call. So really, your input would be valued on that. So you'll be hearing more about that. And still to come for our regulatory initiatives, the Regulatory Affairs Committee talked a bit about establishing a regulatory inspection hotline where members could just call and report, okay, DOT came to visit us and they were looking for training records. No talk about violations or anything like that, but just kind of as an alert to other members, what agencies are doing what are the trends there, just to help warn everybody else. So we're considering how to what the best way to implement that would be to make it easy for you to report these types of things. And finally, we're looking to enhance our regulatory providers program. You may recall that in the past couple of years we had 4 separate regulatory partnerships in various areas. Well, that program, we found it had some deficiencies. Our members didn't use it as much as we had hoped for some areas, especially for some areas, and also it really kind of pigeonholed the firms that we contracted with into holes, because some may have specialized in one area, such as transportation, but they might have been very knowledgeable in OSHA issues as well. So we're going to look to establish more of a preferred providers program, more of a list of firms that are good in particular areas, whether it be DOT, GHS, anything like that. But if they specialize in 2 areas, we'd like to be able to promote that. And really, I have members call all the time saying, do you know of a good consultant who can do a regulatory audit or who could help me with a DOT issue, just to be able to have that list available with good providers. We did ask that question on the regulatory survey if members had different consultants that they worked with that they would recommend, and we did get several names there. So our plan is to develop some sort of a request for proposal and ask firms who are both NACD affiliates, who we have many. We have some great affiliates who have some wonderful knowledge, like ICC, the Compliance Center, and J.J. Keller, and there are some good ones out there. So really kind of focus on the affiliates and give them more opportunity to get their good services in front of the members, as well as other companies that may be out there that people have been happy with, who hopefully we could pull into to be affiliates and help with the membership as well. And that is all I had. At this time, I will turn it over to Cliff to give some closing remarks, and then we can take some questions.
Yeah, Jennifer, thanks a lot. I just again wanted to stress that we are looking at a huge initiative that we're undertaking here, and that I do really encourage people that have some expertise in some of these areas to volunteer when called upon, participate in some of these task groups and subcommittees, because again, we're going to need a lot of input from a lot of people, because there's potentially a lot of different interpretations that we have to weed through to put out the best product. So again, I just hope that everyone will participate. If they have the expertise to help us, that would be a great effort. And it would really help the association go a long ways in fulfilling the needs of the membership. So that's all I had to say, Jennifer. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Cliff. Okay, we have a couple of questions on here. one the participant asked if we could post under responsible distribution instead of or in addition to government affairs. I assume this means the webinars, and that is an excellent question because we do realize that our webinars are all over the place on our website, and we are going to look. We are looking at ways to consolidate that and have a more orderly member resources page where all that would be accessible. So there's more to come on that. And then another question was, when you issue the regulatory checklist, can you put a version number for example, checklist updated as of April 4th, 2013? And yes, we can certainly do that. Okay, I'm going through and seeing if anybody has a hand raised, so we can unmute you. Bear with me just a second here. Okay, looks like we have a raised hand from Megan Nicholas. Megan, do you have a question?
No, I do not.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand or type your question into the box. Okay. Well, seeing none. Oh wait. Okay. No, seeing no further questions, we'll wrap this up then. But if you do have questions, please feel free to contact either myself or Cliff. Here is our contact information, so you can reach us. And we look forward to working with you, and we really appreciate your joining us.